Starwalker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, a podcast all about tabletop role-playing games from the perspective of the captain's chair. Welcome to Game Master's Journey Unplugged. Sit with me around the fire as I discuss the Errata to the Player's Handbook for D&D released by Wizards of the Coast. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener and fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 35 of Game Master's Journey and the second Unplugged episode. So this will be the final Unplugged episode for Season 2. I am your host, Lex Starwalker. I'm really excited to be sitting with you around the fire today. Going to talk a little D&D tonight. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the Errata that was just released for the Player's Handbook of D&D. And if you haven't checked this out, I will have a link directly to the handout at starwalkerstudios.com. You can check it out. This is a nicely formatted PDF. It is one side of one page. You can print this off and just stick it in your player's handbook. And there you go. You've got the Errata. And they are including this, or I should say they're making these changes in future printings of the player's handbook. So if you don't have your player's handbook yet, and you get the latest printing, then it should have this in here, which I'm not sure what printing that is. But for those of us that already have it, we can just print out this one page, just stick it in your player's handbook, and it's very easily, or it's very well organized, so it will be very easy for you to find errata that you need to find. And there's not a lot of stuff, and a lot of this stuff is actually really obvious stuff. I keep saying stuff that you probably can figure out for yourself, but you know, it's always good to have things spelled out as explicitly as possible. And a lot of these are due to questions that the developers at Wizards have been asked time and time again at cons and on Twitter and on the website and stuff. So this is great stuff. So I'm not going to go through everything on here. I'm just going to hit some highlights. So this document starts out saying this corrects or clarifies certain rules in the 5th edition Player's Handbook. Recent printings of the book include revised text that reflects the explanations here. And I wish they told us which printing, but they don't. And again, I'm not sure if this is the second printing or if they've had more than one printing so far. I have no idea. So first of all, I just want to say that I am really impressed with how Wizards is handling 5th edition and how they're interacting with the players of 5th edition. The game itself was playtested extensively before the version that we have in our hands now was released. We have the basic rules free PDFs, so you can go on to Wizards website, you can get the players basic rules PDF, which has everything you need as a player to get started in the game. It has the 4 basic races, the 4 basic classes in it, just the basics of the system. And then there's a PDF for Dungeon Masters that has some monsters in it and stuff like that. And the players PDF, by the way, has been updated with these changes. So if you are using the player's basic rules, go ahead and go to the website and download the new version, and it will be updated with these fixes. So I'm just really happy that, you know, they're doing so much play testing. We have the Unearthed Arcana articles, which they release about once a month, where they present some kind of optional rule for people to play test. They've presented stuff for the Eberron setting. They presented some class features for seagoing adventures, including the Kryn Minotaur, which was really cool. And they've released some mass combat rules and stuff like that, all as part of unearthed arcana. And these are things that may or may not find their way into future products, but they're putting them out there for us to play test and play with. And I think that's awesome. And I think it's awesome that so soon after the release of the Player's Handbook, we already have an official errata. There are some games out there that I won't name any names that have a very strong need of errata that have been out much longer than the Player's Handbook for D&D and still no official errata available. And Wizards also is one of the best companies in my experience at responding to their fans and answering questions and clearing up things that are confusing. I think Wizards and Paizo are both on top in that regards. They do a great job of helping GMs and players who have questions about the rules. I myself have submitted more than one question to Jeremy Crawford on Twitter, and he's answered them. And it's really helped clear up some things, and a few of those are actually in the errata here. So let's get to the errata, and I'll go over a few of these things. So the way this is laid out is first we have some race changes, and then we go through each of the classes, and then equipment, multi-classing, feats, ability scores, adventuring, combat, spells. So these are corresponding to chapters in the Player's Handbook, and each of these errata gives a page number, so it's really easy peasy. So races, the first one we have Dwarven combat training from page 20. Dwarves are not proficient with, or I should say dwarves are proficient with the light hammer, not the throwing hammer. So that's good to know. And Drow magic from page 24. Here, the quote-unquote once per day means you must finish a long rest to cast a spell again with the trait. And, you know, this is one of the numerous examples on this errata where I look at it and I'm like, well, yeah, duh. But some people need this stuff spelled out, right? So, you know, anytime you see something in the game that says you can do this once per day, what that means is you need to complete a long rest before you can do it again. It's pretty simple, but it's nice to have it spelled out for people that were confused by that. Another one I wanted to mention is under the sorcerer, the twinned spell ability from page 102. A clarification here: to be eligible for twinned spell, a spell must be incapable of targeting more than one creature at the spell's current level. So no more twinning magic missiles and no more twinning scorching wraiths. For all you GMs out there that felt that seemed a little broken, it is. So that's good to know. Another one I wanted to mention under the wizard, there's a few of these. Your spell book, page 114. The spells copied into a spell book must be of a spell level the wizard can prepare. Again, I'm kind of like, well, duh. Seems obvious, but I guess some people needed that spelled out. Also on page 114 about the spell book, a spell book doesn't contain cantrips. And this is another one that just seems glaringly obvious to me, but this is one that I have seen people discuss online, whether, you know, you have cantrips in your spell book and whether, you know, you can learn cantrips from like a scroll and add them to your spell book. And the answer to both those questions is no. And again, it's pretty obvious if you look at how cantrips are handled in the game. If you look at the wizard class table, cantrips have their own special column, and you have the number of cantrips that you know, and that's it. It has nothing to do with your spell book. You just know how to do those cantrips. They're not in your spell book. And again, if you find a scroll with a cantrip on it, because there are scrolls with cantrips on them, that will allow you to cast a cantrip that you don't know, but you can't use that to copy a cantrip in your spellbook, because again, the number of cantrips that you know is limited by that cantrips known column of your class table, and so you can't cheat the system and learn new cantrips from scrolls. So basically, if you find a scroll of a cantrip you already know, it's kind of useless to you. And, you know, it's kind of useless if you don't know the cantrip, other than you can cast that cantrip once with the scroll. So I guess there might be some use to that. I don't know. Empowered evocation from page 117. The damage bonus from Empowered Evocation applies to one damage roll of a spell, not multiple rolls. So that's good to know. I'm glad to know that. I have an Evoker character that's going to be getting that ability someday, and it's good to know that that damage bonus only applies to one of the damage rolls, not multiple ones. Over channel from page 118, this feature does not benefit cantrips. Then in our equipment chapter, here's one that I've debated with and people in my own group. The ammunition quality from page 146, loading a one-handed weapon requires a free hand. And there was actually a section of, I think it was one of the Sage Advice columns recently devoted to this. And some people were thinking that you could, for instance, have 2 hand crossbows and be shooting those multiple times around. And there's a feat, I'm blanking on what it's called, that basically removes the kind of the effects of the reloading aspect of those weapons to where you can basically reload them super fast and it doesn't limit. Because normally if you have like multiple attacks and you're shooting a crossbow, the reloading aspect of that will prevent you from shooting that more than once in a round. And there's a feat that removes that and lets you shoot it more than once a round. And people thought that with that feat that you could have a hand crossbow in each hand and be shooting those multiple times around. And you can't, because it does not remove the ammunition quality. And the ammunition quality specifies that, you need a free hand to reload that. So you could shoot each of those hand crossbows once, but then you can't reload them because you don't have a free hand unless you've got 3 hands. So yeah, that's been clarified. Also, reach from page 147. This property also determines your reach for opportunity attacks with a reach weapon. And this is another one that I think is super obvious, but again, sometimes people need things spelled out. So yeah, if you have a weapon with 10-foot reach, then you can take opportunity attacks for people within 10 feet. Two-handed from page 147. This property is relevant only when you attack with the weapon, not when you simply hold it. And again, this is like super obvious to me, but I think what was going on is there were some people that thought that if you were using a two-handed weapon, you couldn't do anything else with that other hand, like for instance, do the somatic component of a spell. And I mean, obviously, if you just think about it for a second, that's not true. You don't need 2 hands to hold a two-handed sword. You just need 2 hands to swing it properly. So you could easily take a hand off the hilt of your two-handed sword to cast a spell, as long as you have both hands on the sword when you're attacking with it. And also weapons on page 149. The unarmed strike does not belong on the weapons table. Under multi-classing, page 164, class features, you gain the starting equipment of your first class only. And again, this is pretty obvious, I think. There's a chart there that tells you, what you get from the second class or third class or whatever when you multi-class, and equipment was not on that chart, so you don't get it. Another interesting one under using ability scores from page 177, hiding, they've made a clarification to this. The DM decides when circumstances are appropriate for hiding. And the clarification they've made here is the question isn't just whether or not a creature can see you when you're hiding. The question is whether it can see you clearly. So this is a bit of a change that they've made. Originally, it said that if a creature can't see you, you can't hide from it. But now they're saying it has to be able to see you clearly. So if you're obscured or something like that, you have a chance of being able to hide. But again, this is very intentionally left in the hands of the GM or the DM, how she's going to rule this, So as a DM, you make your best judgment of whether you think it's even possible to hide from the creature. And like it says in the player's handbook, people are usually pretty aware of what's going on around them in combat. So if someone can see you, like you're a rogue and you just attacked someone and everybody saw you attack that person, you're probably not going to be able to hide then after that, because everybody knows that you're there and they're keeping an eye on you. Now, however, with this change, if there's some obscurement going on, then you have a better chance. But I think it's very likely your DM might give you disadvantage on that, depending on the circumstances. But at least now you can try to do it, where before it said if they could see you, you couldn't. Kind of a cool clarification under suffocating from page 183 is that if you run out of breath, you can't regain hit points or be stabilized until you can breathe again. Also on the same page regarding vision and light, a heavily obscured area doesn't blind you, but you are effectively blinded when you try to see something obscured by it. And long rest from page 186, you regain at least one hit die when you finish a long rest. And I think this is due to some confusion some people had because, unless it's stated otherwise, you always divide things down in D&D. And when you do a long rest, you regain half your hit dice. So there were people that thought that at first level, you don't regain any hit dice because half of one is 0.5 and you round down. So I think that there probably needed to be a little statement there of, a minimum of one hit die. So they've fixed that. Here's the clarification that's come up in my games before. When you're using the ready action, you have until the start of your next turn to use the readied action. And so you do not have to do that by the end of the current turn. You have until the start of your next turn to do the readied thing. So that could mean that, let's say you go in a fairly low initiative on the turn, that you will actually be taking that readied action in the following turn towards the beginning of the turn, and then you will then get your full normal action later on in that turn. Melee attacks on page 195. The rule on unarmed strikes should read as follows. Instead of using a weapon to make a melee weapon attack, you can use an unarmed strike, a punch, kick, headbutt, or similar forceful blow, none of which count as weapons. On a hit, an unarmed strike deals bludgeoning damage equal to 1 plus your strength modifier. You are proficient with your unarmed strikes. So that's really relevant to monks out there and to anyone that wants to brawl with their fists. Some corrections with spells. Paladin spells, page 209. The spell Destructive Smite listed in the table there is actually supposed to be Destructive Wave. And that's something that we've run into in my game, and that's what we figured, but it's nice to know for sure. Mass Cure Wounds from page 258 is supposed to be Evocation School, not Conjuration. Same thing with Mass Heal from page 258. Should be Evocation, not Conjuration. With the Phantasmal Killer spell from page 265, the frightened target makes a save at the end of its turn, not the start. And that is usually how most of those spells like that work. When you get to make it the save again every turn, it's usually at the end of your turn. Revivify from page 272. This spell should be Necromancy, not Conjuration. And finally, they make a last note here regarding creature statistics, that when you're in doubt, the Monster Manual version of a creature stat block is authoritative. So there you go. That trumps, stats from the beginner box or from the player's handbook or whatever. Always go with the Monster Manual stats. So there you go. There's the errata. And actually, that was most of it. There are some things I skipped, but I think I actually mentioned more of the things than I skipped. So not a lot of stuff. Again, it's all on one side of one page. But yeah, we'll really clear up some confusion. Now, one thing that I did not see addressed here, which is something that we've been discussing in my gaming group lately, is the effects of spells that do multiple damages, like, say, Scorching Ray or Magic Missile, versus someone who is concentrating. So I don't know what I would consider a definitive ruling on this. One of the people that commented on one of our YouTube videos said that he was at a con and someone asked this question, and Mike Merles had said that the Magic Missile spell does not force multiple concentration rolls because it specifies in the text of the spell that all of the missiles hit simultaneously. Whereas a spell like Scorching Ray, it does not make that distinction. So, I mean, I don't have a verifiable source of that. However, after thinking about it myself quite a bit, I think that actually makes sense, partly because it makes that distinction of it hitting at the same time. But I think the more important distinction there is actually that, you can argue that a magic missile is one attack. Even if you hit someone with 5 missiles, you can argue it's one attack because, well, first it says they strike simultaneously, but more to the point, I think, because there's not an attack roll, right? Where Scorching Ray, if you shoot 3 rays at one target, you have to make 3 separate attack rolls. So obviously that's 3 separate attacks, right? So I think the fact that there's not an attack roll involved is a little more relevant than the fact that they hit simultaneously. I mean, it doesn't really kind of hold up when you think about it. It's like, well, 2 people could attack someone at the same time, and would you consider that one attack for the sakes of concentration? I don't think you would. But yeah, I think it makes sense because it made Magic Missile a little OP, because you could hit someone with 5 magic missiles and they've got to make 5 concentration rolls, which seems a little overpowered when you don't even have to roll to hit with those magic missiles and there's no saving throw. Where having it work that way with Scorching Ray makes more sense because you have to actually make 3 successful attack rolls. It's not just automatic. So with Magic Missile, it would be the total damage that they would roll against for their concentration save, where the Scorching Ray, it would be versus each ray individually. So cool stuff. So that's basically what I wanted to say about the errata tonight. I just thought it would be fun to kind of go over that a little bit. And just, I want to acknowledge the awesomeness of Wizards of the Coast and the way they're supporting this edition, again, with, the Sage Advice columns and the Unearthed Arcana columns, and giving us optional rules to play test, and answering our questions on Twitter, and actually putting out official errata documents, which Wizards has always been good at that. I remember when I played 3rd edition in 3.5, they always had errata for all their products in relatively short order. And, I just always assumed that's the way it was done, that was professionalism. But I've since encountered game companies that don't do that ever, much rather in a timely fashion. So I really appreciate that they take the time to do this, and that they clear up these kind of muddy areas for people so that we can all stop arguing about the rules and get back to enjoying the game. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to email me, please do so at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Follow me on Google+, just search for Lex Starwalker, and follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Please visit the website at starwalkerstudios.com, where you can find lots of helpful links, including a link so that you can join up our Google+ community. Would love to see more listeners there. And also lots of links to help you support the show in whatever way works for you. One great way is to try out Audible books for 30 days for free, courtesy of Game Master's Journey. You can find the links and details for that at the bottom of the show notes. Also at the bottom of the show notes, you can find my Amazon referral link, which you can click on. Go to Amazon, buy whatever you want to buy, and that helps me out too. At the top of the show, you can find the Patreon button that will take you to my Patreon page, where you can become a patron of the show. Really appreciate all my patrons. Or if you'd prefer giving a one-time donation, you can use the pink donate button, also at the top of the show notes. And finally, also at the top of the show notes, you will find buttons for iTunes or Stitcher, and you can use those to find the show there. And please leave a review. I really appreciate it. So I will be back next week with a new regular episode of Game Master's Journey. I hope in the meantime that you get a chance to play your RPG of choice. So until next week, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.